All right. It's audio and video?
It is, and we are, I believe we are live now. So look at that.
Okay.
We are ready to rumble.
Hi.
Thank you, Roman. I know all of a sudden you're, as I empathize greatly as a mom trying to parent and do homeschooling and run a business, and nothing compared to what you're dealing with, but I understand the time sensitivity. So I'm going to get right into this, guys.
I'm just gonna plug my, I'm sorry, my power's a little low.
You go right ahead. I'm going to do an intro while you do that. So everybody, give a few seconds for people to join on. For people joining us, this is an interview that I'm not looking to recruit teams here. I'm not looking to sway people's positions. I'm not looking for any of that. What I'm looking to do with this interview is to increase conversation, honest conversations, but also for you as a person to look within yourself to see where you stand and what you want to do. Because sometimes when we feel very hopeless and we feel depressed and we feel anxious, having a sense of purpose really helps that. So if you're already on board with what everything is happening with the Ontario government, great. But also listening to other perspectives, I think, is helpful. So who we have here today is Roman Baber. He is a Canadian politician who was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario in the 2018 provincial election. He represents the riding of York Centre as an independent. He was a progressive conservative until January 15th, 2021, when Premier Doug Ford removed him from caucus over his opposition to the province's lockdown and restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic in Ontario. Baber was born and raised in the former Soviet Union. He and his family moved to Israel when he was 8 before immigrating to Canada in 1995 when he was 15. Baber's family settled in Toronto in the Bathurst Street and Shepherd Avenue area where he still lives. He is a lawyer by profession and attended William Lyon Mackenzie Collegiate Institute and York University before earning his law degree at the University of Western Ontario. Prior to being expelled from the PC caucus, he was chair of the legislature's Justice Policy Committee. So thank you for joining us, Roman. I know you're tight for time, and we're going to do the best we can to answer as many questions as we can and see where things have unfolded since the 15th of January. Roman, my first question to you is why? Why publicly not unify with your party? Why already sort of contribute to the polarization that seems to be an epidemic in itself?
Michelle, thank you so much for having me, and it's good to be with your viewers. I feel that over the last couple of months, the mitigation of the pandemic effect has reached a boiling point of sorts. And I felt that it's incumbent on me as a politician that got into politics for all the right reasons and is very much in tune with the feelings and sentiment of my constituency to try and begin a public conversation about not just the effects of COVID, which is a very real virus and affects certain populations very aggressively, but also the toll of the lockdown that's presently imposed on us. And in fact, one form of lockdown or another for the last 10 months. And it is the sparking of this public conversation, a conversation that's been missing from the public domain and for some reason could not have been had, that I wanted to instigate. And I'm pleased that over the course of the last 4 or 5 days, the public conversation about the toll of the public health restrictions has begun.
So did you feel a lot of pressure from your constituents to say publicly what you were saying?
I felt remarkable pressure from my constituents and friends and loved ones. And I would say that I have been noticing some of the things that constituents have been telling me for about the last 6 months or so, but of course, more prevalently for the last couple of months. Yes, over the last couple of weeks, I've heard remarkable stories. I heard of a very dear constituent, a woman in her late 50s who passed away from cancer. And she was cremated, and her father and one of the siblings was allowed into the funeral home. And because of the gathering restrictions, another sibling was not allowed into the home to be there during his sister's cremation. In the weeks leading to my letter, I've heard from a number of constituents and friends about personal stories of people attempting to take their own lives and self-harming. A very good constituent of mine who authored an open letter to Minister MacLeod described a mother of 5 who knew that she's going to lose her job with him, attempted to take her own life the previous week. Several days before the letter, I heard from another good constituent who said to me that his mom's heart surgery, it was supposed to be a valve replacement, was canceled on the day of the surgery because the hospital couldn't guarantee a bed. Meanwhile, the hospital was holding back empty beds in case there was a surge that night. And my letter was not necessarily about the business community or the tremendous toll that the pandemic is taking, that mitigation is taking on our livelihoods. But in fact, most of my letter was about healthcare. The prejudice resulting to folks from loss of healthcare cannot be understated. Health, mental health, and our overall well-being have to be factored into this equation of COVID mitigation, of COVID versus COVID mitigation. And I felt that it hasn't been, and it is something that, as a person of faith and conscience, I felt that I had to bring forward.
So I'm going to go through some pieces of the letter. I also have some responses from readers about you. You have a very divided audience. Some are, support Roman all the way with Roman, and some are completely against it, which is that's what everything is with this pandemic. But at the end, you do have something. This is my big message: is solutions to this, rather than kind of sitting around and talking. Proposed solutions. I just want to read a couple of things you wrote here. COVID is real. This is in the letter that you addressed. Is real, but the fear of COVID is exaggerated. While every death is tragic, after 10 months, we learned that COVID is not nearly as deadly as first thought. It has a 99.98% infection survival rate, according to the CDC's latest estimates. COVID's infection fatality rate by age is as follows, and you do a little breakdown here. But there's a lot of people who are feeling like that dismisses or unvalidates frontline workers or people who have died from COVID. But that's not what you were trying to say, if I understand correctly.
Not at all. In fact, as I've just said, I've made an argument, a humanist argument, in defense of human lives that are prejudiced by COVID. One of the statistics that I cite is that, and properly, from a Toronto Sun article, which quotes Princess Margaret oncologist, who says that our cancer screenings are barely back up to 60%. Cancer is the second leading cause of death in Canada after heart disease. And so imagine how many cancers have been missed because of COVID mitigation, because Ontarians are unable to properly access healthcare. Those lives also need to be taken into account. And look, I come from the Jewish faith, where we have a principle of one life is the entire universe. But I try to say, look, over the last 10 months, we have learned quite a bit about COVID. And this is no longer the World War III that we thought that we're in for in March or April. In May, Princeton came out and said the infection rate is about 50 times cases. And when that happened, folks said, really, for every person out there that we test with COVID, 50 are walking around with COVID that we don't know? That's terrible. And I said, no, that's the opposite. It really means that all of our metrics that we care about, like mortality rate, hospitalization rate, are really 50 times lower. That serology rate has been estimated in France, in Spain, in New York, in LA to be about 20 times cases. My apologies, I just got to plug my power.
No problem. We're going to answer some of your questions, you guys, that you have commented on.
I apologize. So the point I was going to make is, we learned that this thing is not as deadly as we thought to the population at large. If we look at Statistics Canada today, in fact, today we see that of the total, and I think we're up to about 12,000. I'm not sure where we're at Canada-wide. I know the Ontario number is better. About 10,500 died in long-term care and retirement homes, and that's the number in Ontario. Over 80% of folks, and of course we can't diminish their life, have died in long-term care and retirement home. And that's important because we need to understand their susceptibility to the virus. So we know that, unfortunately, the average longevity in a long-term care is about 18 months, which means regretfully that the folks that have passed away from this, most of them were in their last year of life. And that is very tragic. And in fact, I'm very angry at the government for not being able to handle the long-term care situation, not having proper PPE, not having proper infection control 10 months into the pandemic. But now we need to factor in the cost of the healthy who were making sick with these lockdowns, kids that are depressed, kids are getting overweight, parents are developing anxiety and depression, cancers that we're missing. That is something that can't be missing from the equation.
There's no doubt there's no answer to solve everything here. This is the most challenging thing we've ever been through. The biggest struggle I have with all of this, Roman, is why wouldn't the premier, why wouldn't he say, okay, like, let's discuss, or like, why is he voting on this side and not that side? Because you guys seem to have a pretty great relationship leading into this. I mean, he's always singing your accolades. You guys seem like you were, I don't know what your relationship is outside of the politics end of it, but if it's makes so much more sense, and if we're going to allocate this money, and this is, our highest risk population is in long-term care facilities, and lockdowns don't work if they really aren't risk versus reward, and we're looking at the stats, why would he continue to do lockdowns then?
I won't comment on my relationship with the premier prior to my expulsion. It is safe to say that the premier and I have had a lot of conversations about our public strategy. I think that perhaps that there is an element of fear, the very same fear that prompted some of the folks to accuse me of belittling lives, that prompts politicians to not be able to communicate the sensible argument that we have to have a sensible and sane approach to this and properly value the risk. I think there may be a political concern here in that there's a perception that if we deviate from the advice of public health, that every, God forbid, passing that will be experienced subsequent to that will be on the government's, will be blamed on the government. That's probably one element. Another element is there's no question that governments all over the world, including in our country, provincial governments for the most part, have significantly benefited politically from the pandemic. And I'm of the view that we need to divorce politics from what is transpiring and have courage to look at the situation objectively, something that I don't believe has been done to date.
Do you support conspiracy theorists?
I just conspired to go out for lunch and I got a Subway sandwich, but no, I don't believe in any of that stuff about the Great Reset or whatever it is. I have a different idea as to what transpired. There was an interesting story of a virus coming out of China. We know that we have an acrimonious relationship. We then have a very high case rate. We have a very high infection rate, and it's clear that COVID is very transmittable. We then understand that it can be quite deadly to some folks. Between all of that, the fear is perpetuated, at least in the beginning, rightfully so, and the fear takes hold. A public narrative develops, and that narrative is now supported by political correctness because it's important to value lives on top of everything else. That political correctness becomes very much ingrained in the story, and subsequently that political correctness is fortified by what I call cancel culture. And subsequently we have, and all of that is compounded by the fact that I think public health realizes, a lot of professionals realizes that the first lockdown was probably a mistake, that the lockdowns are a mistake, but they're unwilling to fold. They're unwilling to admit that they are wrong. Their professional reputations are on the line.
You think that ego would trump common sense?
I have no question that, and I met a lot of professionals in my life. I practiced law for 12 years. I cross-examined dozens, if not hundreds, of doctors and accountants and lawyers as well. There's no question that professional reputations is something that is very, very easy to lose.
Wow. It's like high school all over again. It's the only thing you care about. So, it's a fascinating discussion about what is transpiring here ultimately. But you have solutions as well that you want to propose. But I have a few more questions before we get into that. I want to just say this because it seems like if you say you're not for a lockdown, people seem to think that that means you're either a conspiracy theorist or an anti-masker. And those two things they're not the same thing at all. In the interviews that I've done.
What I do is I ask to weigh all I'm asking is to weigh the cost of healthcare. Just in the last couple of days, educators are speaking out about the untold toll that the lockdown is taking on our children. They're depressed. They all experience anxiety and they want to be back with their friends. There's a health consequence to that. This morning, there's an article about serious eating disorders among adolescents. That is something to consider. Again, we're missing medical appointments. We're missing cancer screenings. And how about the mental health toll? I mean, the Mental Health Association became very critical of me. And they said, look, I mean, maybe the numbers are right, but who knows what's driving the numbers? And we're certainly not against lockdown, but we know that the number of Canadians with suicidal thoughts has now quadrupled from 2.5% to 10%. 19 to 35, the age category of 19 to 35, 20% of Canadians in that age group are experiencing thoughts and feelings of suicide. Is that not part of health and lives? Should that not be weighed in equally? So
that's perfect, Roman, because that's the question that Sally Carson had, who's quite a critic of you. Okay, so we'll go into his warning. I said he's a politician; he can handle these questions. Were you or were you not kicked out of caucus for misrepresentation of stats? Didn't the CMHA send a statement out regarding your misinformation? So wasn't that in fact the reason you were kicked out?
No, I don't believe that the CMHA disputed my actual numbers. What they said is you've disputed our intention. Okay. I said I used those numbers in support of the proposition that this is caused by lockdown and is causing suicidal thoughts. The CMHA said, well, no, it's probably caused by the pandemic, which is causing the lockdown, which is causing the depression. But
so we get lost in
but their letter said, well, let us be clear. We're supportive of we're very supportive of lockdowns. It's also important to remember, and this is an organization that I've been incredibly supportive of. So I've been quite surprised by their harsh reaction. But no, it would be hard for me to believe that the CMHA would be so aggressively supportive of lockdowns, fully knowing what they're doing to people's health. I think that it's important to note that this is a transfer party. This is a party that receives government funding, as almost all of the people that have opined and weighed in to my letter. No, not represented the study. The study was taken in September 2020, and everyone's welcome to see the figures for themselves.
It's a semantics thing, right? As a lot of politics is.
It's politics thing, Michelle. Yeah. It's about politics, and it's about political correctness, which I refuse to subscribe to if the cost of it is lives. And again, I may be wrong, but I would like to say the following. I'm just asking for an equation to be drawn and considered. On one hand, we have the total risk of COVID and the effect on certain populations. More than 80% of folks who died tragically are over 80. And in fact, the average mortality is above the average Canadian mortality, 85 versus 83. So we have to look at that, and and on the other side of the equation, I would like to consider the toll. No one has spoken about the other side of the equation, and I think it's a fair inquiry to make and let the chips fall where they are, acting fairly and objectively.
I know I got to get you off because you have lots to do. I'm going to go through these next few questions and then give people a call to action for support if they're on your team. L.A. Vandenberg, how does he expect the hospitals to cope when the numbers are surging and they are not already full? What are his thoughts about them choosing who gets ICU care and who doesn't when hospitals cannot provide care to everyone? What are the alternatives to a lockdown that would protect people and preserve hospital capacity for people who are having heart attacks, strokes, etc.?
So with respect, I do not believe that we're getting accurate information from the Ministry of Health. And in fact, this is a debate that's litigated on Twitter today. I have cited numbers that I received from the Ministry of Health myself. They're accusing me of misinformation. The misinformation is predicated on the numbers that they are putting out, not numbers that I made up. And they're showing that our ICU capacity and our hospital capacity is better this year than it has been in the last 3 years. There's no question about that. So what's happening to us is we have, give or take, depending on how you count them, about 400 hospitals in the province and about under 400 ICU patients in the province. We have about one COVID ICU patient per hospital in Ontario. And saying is what you're seeing is mismanagement. With one ICU patient per hospital, you should be able to manage this crisis better. You should be transferring patients, as they finally started doing now, to free up space if you need to. Now, we've always had capacity. We've always had overcapacity during this time of year in January, especially in the urban centers like Peel and Scarborough. This is what we used to refer to as hallway healthcare. This is nothing new. And the Premier and our party, my former party, have campaigned on this. It's just that all of a sudden it became taboo to be talking about the fact that we've always had overcapacity. No, for 10 months, we've squandered 10 months not building sufficient capacity. We do have a number of tents out there. All of them are sitting empty, like Joseph Brantford, for instance, in Burlington. We did build capacity. It hasn't been used. What I'm saying is we need to think why this is happening from. One of the reasons that capacity is a challenge is we have a lot of COVID protocols in place. We have doctors, we have nurses that are sitting in isolation. We are holding hospital beds back in case of an anticipated surge, which never comes. And a lot of this is anticipated on modeling. The ministry is modeling what kind of surge you can have. I found, and in fact, I've put out information in my letter about that modeling typically ICU modeling tends to be overly aggressive. And it's in the basis of this modeling that they're making very real decisions that affect everyday lives. Again, I'm not, God forbid, looking to compromise lives. I'm looking to save lives.
Thank you. So this last question, this is from Storm Seisho. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. This is one of the criticisms that I saw across the board. There was lots of people who support you, for the record. And I think one of the reasons why I'm reading the non-supporters is to balance it out.
Sure.
Because I know you've seen a huge surge in people supporting you, stepping up, opening up that conversation, because I do think there is a huge amount of fear to say how you really fear or how you really feel for backlash, especially in social media. People are just, they're just terrified. Storm wants to know why you're suddenly worried about suicides and mental health. This is a criticism that came across in terms of the PC party. He supports
conservatives because he anticipates the conservatives are evil people. We don't care about lives. I come from the right of center wing of the party, and that means that I'm an evil human being that doesn't care. I have been a supporter of the Canadian Mental Health Association for as long as I can remember. I have a lot of mental health, both in my family and along with my friends. And how wouldn't you, as a decent human being, not consider the fact that we have a mental health crisis out there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what that's basically what they're saying, because the funding cuts, right? So he went on to basically say he supported his conservative government when it cut hundreds of millions for mental health supports, 335 million.
I did not support, it is well known that I'm on the record speaking inside and outside against the government when it's appropriate to do so. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the listener. In fact, let me say something. The government keeps on peddling this number that they've added $3.9 billion for mental health. Well, that's utter nonsense, because first of all, half of that number is federal number. They match funding. So the Ontario government only provided $2 billion, not 3.9 or 4 billion. And second of all, that's only $200 million a year, because we're talking about over 10 years. So instead of this $4 billion investment that the government touts all the time into mental health, in reality, it's $200 million a year. In a healthcare budget of $65 billion, that's a drop in the bucket. I just gave you an example of government speak.
Yeah, well, I know, and I can tell you my community is one of the highest opioid crises in the province. It's awful. And $200 million, I don't even know if it would touch us to help us. So
if I may, Michelle, just on that very issue, and there was some dispute with respect to my numbers, I put out a responding fact sheet to the government's fact sheet that they couldn't respond to. One of the articles I quoted showed that, and this is in fact Public Health Ontario, that opioid overdose in Ontario is trending 50% above normal. This is a disheartening and a tragic statistic. We may end up having more folks dying. We will have more folks in Ontario dying from opioid overdose than all the folks that died outside of long-term care. So is this not something to consider? Is this not something to factor into our decision? I'll conclude by saying the following. Politics should borrow from medicine, from good medicine. why should we not consider if we're doing harm to people? And what I said in my letter, consider if the medicine is killing the patient. If you're administering medicine to patient, you're not going to administer that medicine if you think that you're going to harm them. So should we not consider if the lockdowns are harming us and to what extent? I'm sure we should. And I'm very, very glad that over the last couple of days, with my letter, despite the backlash that I've received, this conversation has begun. And I'm pleased that this conversation is now on, because hopefully that can lead us to some sensible balance.
It's a conversation that needs to be had, but it needs to be done respectfully. It needs to be done healthfully. It needs to be done in a professional manner. And that takes me to our final point here, Roman, of what, if you feel like you want to have a voice, if you feel like you don't feel like things are being handled properly, because ultimately the government works for us. We are the voters. And sometimes we lose sight of that. I always use the analogy of the movie A Bug's Life. I don't know if you have kids, but it's the grasshoppers and the ants. There's way more ants, but the ants do whatever the grasshoppers tell them. So I think it's just always important in a democratic society to think and to know about choice. And then it's up to you. It's up to you as a person to decide what you want to do. But what have you done now to create organization? Because that's ultimately what you say is the only way to really funnel through this, to make change or to have voices heard, is organization. Is that right, Roman?
A couple of things. One is, by doing what I did, I wanted to empower individuals and give other professionals and healthcare professionals and everyone the courage to start having this conversation. And I'm glad that to some extent, more people now feel more comfortable speaking out about the toll of the very, very extreme public health restrictions. And the second thing is, I do believe that we need to be speaking to the government as a unified force, where those of us that feel that the medicine is killing the patient, that we are able to effectively convey that to the government and suggest that this is a relevant question. It needs to be weighed, and it's also something that needs to be weighed into the political discussion as the government considers their fortunes in the next provincial election. It's important that Doug Ford and the provincial government hear our voice and understand that they cannot continue to impose this catastrophic toll on us without fearing political consequences.
So what do people need to do? Because I don't think anything is achieved without organization and coordination and unification. So what do people do?
I started a petition on romanbabber.ca, my petition to lift the lockdown. Please visit my homepage at www.romanbabber.ca and sign my petition to the Legislative Assembly to ask the government of Ontario to immediately lift the lockdown.
There was a petition that I was putting out when I first started this discussion online, and people were sharing petitions, and then they said, somebody messaged me and said electronic polls don't actually have any weight within the provincial government. Is that true, Roman?
I'm not sure I think that's a different question. What they were saying is that this is an online poll, so it doesn't say the government, but I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about learning names and collecting signatures so folks can come together and be heard collectively, because collectively our voices are a lot stronger. And so I encourage everyone to join me at romanbabber.ca.
Perfect. I'm going to put that link in the comments. And I also need to tell you, just to add a little bit of levity and a little less stress in this conversation, I was calling you Roman Babber the whole time. Then before we did our interview, I was looking at some things and everybody was calling you Roman Baber. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to call him Roman Baber then. So I called you and introduced you, Roman Baber, and I was right. It's Babber.
So they typically call me, I often get that question asked, how should we pronounce your last name? And I said, look, they typically call me, hey, you get off my lawn. That's how folks often, but you'd be surprised to know, they actually refer to me as Roman. I try to be friendly. I've been very, very blessed. I'm Exhibit A for the Canadian opportunity. I came to this country when I was 15. In fact, I came to my very own riding that I represent. My first apartment in this country is about 4 blocks east of me, and my current apartment is 2 blocks west of me. And I've had every opportunity to live, to succeed, to study, graduated law school, started my own practice, and have been blessed. And my story is not unique. And I'm worried that, and I know every government uses a talking point similar to mine, but this is real now. COVID and COVID toll and COVID restrictions and what we're doing to our children and young people is heartbreaking. We're denying them opportunity. We're gonna raise a generation that will be afraid of normal existence.
Yep.
We're going around scaring kids. That is just not right. And in good faith, I'm complete with my decision. I feel good about, I feel okay, at peace with what has transpired. And I'm just glad that the conversations I want, I love the Progressive Conservative Party. I will always respect and miss a lot of my colleagues. But we also have to remember, we serve the constituents and we serve the province, not the party.
It's a very interesting conversation, right? Who do you serve first, the constituents or the party? It's a very tough line to toe, and I wouldn't want your job or anyone's job. We do have one question here, Roman, that people are asking. We've talked about the civilian aspect, but what can small businesses do? Go to your website as well as the petition
Please.
for them as well?
It's the same petition. It will be one petition.
Okay.
But you know, that's when I've been thinking in the weeks leading up to this, if I'm going to do this and why, the response would be lives and livelihoods. It's not just the lives that we're compromising, we're also compromising a lot of livelihoods. And the effect on the loss of livelihoods, the effect on the healthcare of those people should also not be diminished. And this is beyond the restaurants and the shops. This is all of their employees and their suppliers and their advisors and their landlords and their lenders and all of their families. And the overall toll that all of this has taken has become unsustainable. So, and again, I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing out there, and I encourage folks to get involved. And I have no doubt that common sense will prevail.
Well, it's an interesting discussion, Roman. I think I have the utmost respect for anyone who puts themselves in the arena, as Brene Brown has often said. And so I think you did put yourself in the arena. And I think it always comes back to intention. What is the intention of putting yourself in the arena?
Yeah.
The very important moral question that comes back to this. We do have mutual friends in common, and your Jewish background also is a big piece of who you are, that I think it needs to be addressed in how you handle life as well, because there's a lot to the Jewish faith and way people see the world, and you address that. So I appreciate your time, and I hope that your day gets a little less stressful. romanbaber.com and .ca. See, .ca. Now I'm screwing up the ending. I'll put it in the comments. Thanks so much. People, just keep talking, have honest, open conversations. And exactly. I believe that you can care for people, you can want the best for people, and you can still have open conversations. It is not a pitting against each other. We can all do this and support each other. Thank you so much, Roman. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.